Greetings and welcome back. In the first mini lecture for Chapter 1, I talked primarily about political science being a study of power. There tends to be a battle for scarce resources amongst people. And as Harold Laswell pointed out, politics is often about who gets what, when, and how. So we're interested in the relationship between individuals and political institutions, what power political institutions have, what power do we give to political institutions, what power do these institutions have over us, and of course, we talked about power being a currency, the means to pursue the interests of human beings. Now, when Aristotle said that politics is the master science, which is in your notes and I talked about earlier, that does not mean that political science is in a vacuum. Certainly, political science has a lot of connections to other social sciences, and I didn't write this in the notes, but probably I should have. And if you would like to add this to the notes, I would urge you to do so. With social sciences, whether we are historians or geographers or economists or psychologists, in the social sciences, we are seeking to understand human behavior. So all the social sciences have that in common. And obviously, economists are more interested in the economic choices people make. Historians are interested in the human behavior of the past and can we learn lessons from those. Obviously, with psychology, we're seeking to understand the base motivations for why people make the choices they do and why they behave the way they do. And so I listed a few. There obviously are a lot more social sciences than this. But obviously, history is a really important connection to our discipline in political science. History is, as I have listed, a chief source of data for political scientists. I took more history as an undergraduate student than political science. And if you were to look up probably the political article that, if anyone knows who I am, they would know it because the first article that I co authored with my mentor, you can look it up under my name. You can look up Political Science Quarterly Alliance Pathology of the 1930s. And in essence, it is a historical case study. In this study, my mentor and I looked at why didn't the democracy stand up to Hitler and the Rhineland crisis of 1936. In this particular case, the democracies had more power, they were stronger than Hitler. Hitler had the weakest hand, and yet when he occupied the Rhineland in clear violation of international law, England and France protested but really did nothing at all. So, certainly in my case, I am a historian at heart. The political research interests that I have are historical in nature. And so that one in particular is an important one to me. So I have a few listed in my global politics course. I talk about the failure of the Third and Fourth Republics, that these systems were probably too democratic, they were politically unstable. And if you take a look at the current Republic of France, the Fifth Republic, Charles de Gaulle, who wrote that constitution, was responding to the historical inadequacies of both the Third and the Fourth Republic. So in that case, history taught de Gaulle a lesson. De Gaulle created a new political system that is not nearly as democratic as the French political system was from 1870 to 1940, or from 1946 to 58 when we have the Fourth Republic. but the Fifth Republic has lasted since January 1st, 1959. It is a very stable system. The political institutions of France are seen with widespread legitimacy. I'll talk about that concept later. And so, in that case, if you want to understand how and why France is governed by the rules of the game that exist today under the Fifth Republic, the starting place, I would argue, is take a look at the politics of the Third and the Fourth Republics. I mentioned the growth of presidential power under Franklin Roosevelt. There's no question whether you like Roosevelt or you don't like Roosevelt. Certainly, the fact that Roosevelt was president during both the Great Depression and World War II, certainly history and crisis management, and the fact that the United States went through two of its three greatest crises while this man was president explains how and why presidential power changed in a rather dramatic way over that time period. I did point out, it's not important for test purposes, but I pointed out that even though historians and political scientists are often interested in the same events, we have a different emphasis. Historians study an event in detail. Uh, they're good at giving us details and dates and what happened, but they're reluctant to generalize and apply that to other events. In the case of political scientists, we believe that those details that the historians give us are only important because then we can find some generalizations and we can do some comparative analysis depending on events. And maybe we can find some common themes between events of the past or an event of the present and a crisis of the present and an event of the past. In political science, we often talk about geography. I know it is political seasons. We have a presidential election going on, and political commentators are talking about politics. They're talking about the election of the president, but they wind geography into it. For example, often you hear this discussion of red states, which in the United States, red states tend to be the Republican states, blue states that are Democratic states, and then purple states that can go kind of either way or where Democrats and Republicans are evenly divided. You have to be careful about this, though, because if you were to look at a political map of England, the blue areas are considered the conservative areas, and the red areas are considered the liberal areas. So if you put a map of the United States, red versus blue, and a map of Britain, red and blue, they better have a key so you know what red and blue mean, because red and blue mean very, very different things in different countries. So I believe that both physical and cultural geography are important. And certainly, from my perspective, if you take a look at geography, uh, countries that are kind of unified late, like Germany, for example, often have kind of an identity crisis. And if you take a look at Germany, their states, which they call Länder in Germany, have far more independence than American states. And I'll talk about that later. Economics. I'm going to use the term rational choice a lot. Hobbes, Locke, our social contract theorists argued that that's why we create government. Governments are created rational choice because people understand we are better off with a government than without it. They believe that we understand that we're imperfect creatures, and if government did not exist, our deficiencies would be magnified. So, according to the economists, we create government out of a rational choice. Economically, we make the assumption that people pursue their self interests And we make that assumption in the political world, that people pursue their selfish interests. In fact, economically, if you take a look at the United Nations makes a claim that there is an economic prerequisite for democracy, that if a country does not have a gross domestic product of about $8,000 a year, democracy is likely to fail. Now, that's not always true, because the largest democracy in the world, India, does not meet that threshold of $8,000 a year, and yet they are an enduring democracy. So that linkage between economics and politics is powerful. And we have a gardener outside that's doing leaf blowing, so if you're hearing a noise on the video, I apologize. It's beyond my control. But the point is just as in the economic world, people pursue their selfish interest, this is true in the political world as well. The last of the social sciences I have mentioned, personality in politics. Obviously, there's a lot of connections here. There have been a lot of studies on the role of personality on decision making, the belief that people have very different motivations psychologically. If any of you took Political Science 1201 and you heard the Barber study, right, that talked about presidents as active or passive, liking being president or not. Remember, according to Barber, some presidents pursue power to get results. Some people are motivated by love or affection. Some people are motivated by civic duty or honor, and some people are motivated by raw power. Psychologically, we're all very different. We have different motivations. And to me personally, this is the most difficult component of looking at political leaders and political behavior. It is very easy to look at the decision that was made, but the motivation for that behavior is incredibly difficult to determine. And so when we're talking about political behavior, this psychological base motivation for the decision can result in tremendous misperceptions. And sometimes people make the lazy assumption that if two people engage in the same political behavior, they're being motivated by the same thing, when in fact that's often not true at all. So political science does not exist in a vacuum. Political science makes use of history and geography, economics, psychology, and perhaps some others. But certainly, I think those four are a good place to start. I very briefly will just, in the last 2 minutes that I have in this mini lecture, talk about approaches to political science. Your book talks about these in detail, so I will just mention them. When we talk about the ancient Greeks take what's called this traditionalistic or traditionalism view of politics and political science, right? This takes on a normative approach, star normative. Plato and Aristotle, for example, sought out how should people live? How should people behave? The people who believe in traditionalism want to understand how political behavior in institutions, are political institutions behaving how they ought to be? So the traditionalists are seeking value judgments, what should be, rather than what is. The behavioralists are more interested not in what should be, which is what the traditionalists are interested in, but what is. The behavioralists are largely data driven. They're interested in the actual behavior of people in institutions. They're not interested in what should be. They're interested in what is. So, for example, is there a correlation between race and gender and how one votes? So they're interested in an empirical analysis. And of course, the post-behavioralists, as I have pointed out, seek a combination of the two perspectives. In the next mini lecture, I want to get back to power and the four different types of power. Hope you had a great day.